Hello and welcome to Life Support Live, the weekly show that explores how Star Trek can help us boldly go in our own lives, better ourselves, and the rest of humanity.
Yes, but also have a little fun along the way. As a very famous and soon-to-be even more famouser Star Trek captain once said.
That's right. Dr. Trek is here. Welcome, Larry. My name is Dr. Ali Mattu. I'm a clinical psychologist.
Yeah,
and
I am Dr. Trek, Larry Nemecek, and one of us is a real doctor.
Yeah, I might have spoiled just which one, but we'll always let you decide who is who. On this episode, we are talking prejudice, equity, justice. In Star Trek, we're talking about stereotypes, we're talking about prejudice, we're talking about everything, infinite diversity and infinite combinations.
This is great, Ali, but some week I really want to try to find something that's topical.
Yeah, I know, right? Gosh. The last few weeks, Larry, it's been some. We've tackled some pretty big topics here. So we're gonna get the conversation started. We want to know, what is your favorite Star Trek story about prejudice, equity, and why? There's so many to choose from. You can pick one from any franchise. You can pick one about xenophobia. You can pick one about stuff going on Earth. There's so much to pick from.
There's allegory, and there's on the nose. Literally, on the nose.
Yeah. Let that be your last battlefield. Might be one of them. So let us know in the comments what's your favorite one. If this is your first time on Life Support, well, this is the first time at our new time. So thank you for joining us. We moved the show a little bit earlier. We've been having a lot of fun with the show. We want to make it more sustainable for the long term, and the easiest way for us to do that was to move the show a little bit earlier. So sorry, West Coasters, if you had to get up a little bit earlier. I recommend. I was debating, should I go tea Earl Grey hot or should I do coffee black? I went with the Janeway pick this morning. So yeah. Please get your beverages. Join us if you're on the West Coast in the morning hours. But around the world, I think this might be a better time for.
I'm going to say this is Trip Tucker Diet Dr. Pepper, because I know McCoy wouldn't have messed with it, and the only other Southerner I can think of is Trips.
Trip would totally be a Dr. Pepper guy, 100%.
Dr. Pepper would even still be in business.
Yeah, probably.
In the 2150s. So
maybe they have some kind of government subsidies keeping them going in some kind of weird way. Making the coffee now, says Scott, and RGTD says Ractigino. I would love a Ractigino. I've always wanted to try that. Did they have Ractiginos at the Star Trek Experience in Las Vegas, Larry?
Of course they did. They past tense. Ooh, past tense. See what I did there?
Hey, I see what you did there.
Yeah. Of course they had Ractigino. Ractigino is just Klingon iced coffee, which was supposed to be a joke.
Is it always iced? Can you get a Ractigino hot?
Well, you probably could by the time you finagled it. But the idea was when coffee and Starbucks and iced coffee became a thing in the 90s, they went, let's have a Klingon in Starbucks. And, that was the joke. Which totally got lost because people just love saying Ractigino.
Oh, it sounds so good. Tim Hans is going for the Romulan ale. Hey, might be type for that wherever you might be. Zahir saying, I'm a traditional coffee man. Double strong, double sweet. I like that. And Tiger Tracker says, I make Ractiginos regularly, hot or cold, depending on the day. Let's just talk about caffeine in the final frontier.
Let's do that. At 10 a.m. on a Saturday, that sounds like a good idea. Yeah, 10 a.m. Pacific, But seriously, thanks everybody for finding us 2 hours earlier. Thanks for coming in on this topic today.
Yeah.
Seems rather apropos. And thanks wherever you're coming from. Just a quick reminder, we are multi-channel here today. Yeah. As always, we're on 2 different YouTube platforms and 2 different Facebooks and our Twitch. So we love the chat. We're going to be dipping in and out of it. And at the end, we will have a hailing frequencies open channel time. So especially if you're on Twitch, just know that all 3 platforms, you can only see the chat from your platform.
Yeah.
We're looking at a master feed. So I don't want anybody to think that we're ignoring you or we're looking past you or who's he talking to about that. we're looking at a master feat. Just so you know, especially you guys on Twitch, and I'll try to remember that. But no, awesome chat.
And we put up the comments on screen
Yes.
as we're talking about.
A lot of them we do, right?
Yep. Yep.
And you can see where they're coming from, but some of you, that's the only clue you have, that it's beyond your little circle. This thing is bigger than any of us. So aside from the fact some of our diagnoses we talk about, and some of our conditions, and some of our comments, sadly, are bigger than all of us. And prejudice seems to be one.
Well, with that, let's go into the briefing room. Let's jump into this briefing room segment where we're getting into this topic and exploring it. And so,
through that,
Larry, there's so much to talk about here. I mean, this is the past few weeks in America. We've seen very blatant representations of racism, how it's still alive in America. George Floyd was killed at the hands of police custody in a video that's now been seen around the world. And it's also brought to light more examples of racism, of police brutality, of prejudice, and also of people coming together, standing for equity and standing for justice. Now, this is something that has been at the core of Star Trek for a very long time, has been explored in a wide variety of episodes. So I kind of want to talk in the beginning here about how we get to that future we see in the original series, how we, in canon, like, how did we get from here, and also what fictionally happens here. We have this eugenics war and the rise of Khan, and all this stuff happens. That's impression number one of the day. My jaw wasn't quite in it. I need a lot more Shatner. I can't. It's all in the jaw, that scene.
Didn't go full Genesis on it. Yeah.
No. So I want to talk about how we get to that utopian future in Star Trek. How does Star Trek lay the groundwork for this future that is very different than the present we are in right now?
Well, I'm glad you went to the canon side of that, because as a real life concept, I'm still working on it.
Yeah. We all are.
Yeah. No, I just want to say that yes, this week, George Floyd in Minnesota, it's that has ripped off a Band-Aid that I think has caught even people. The original Sandra Marshak and Jacqueline Lichtenberg wrote one of the first books about Star Trek, analyzing it, and they called all the different effects, why it had such a big audience and was so powerful, because it reached out to all these pools of audience, this Venn diagram of people, and one of them was they called simply the discovery effect. And I almost, which in this going viral, we all are online era, the discovery effect was just the fact that you watched Star Trek in your own little town, in your own living room, and had no idea. You thought you were goofy. You had no idea there were tens and hundreds and thousands and millions of other people that felt the same way. And once you've discovered that there were others just like you, you were like, oh my God. And that made it stronger. And I think we've been in our own version of a discovery effect this week. Not so much that we didn't know, prejudice and racism existed, but that the more people saw people incensed by that video, we can talk about this in a minute, but the more people saw a discovery effect, by the second or third, very early on, this was not a black thing again, a black thing with a few white faces sprinkled in. It was amazing to me how there were like these small all-white towns in Alabama that had people out, even those numbers. And what seems to be striking about this moment is, why is this different than other times? And it's given some people hope, and we'll get into that. But it also has ripped off a Band-Aid that seems like it's allowed us to go deeper into what some people are finally becoming aware of as systemic racism, and being able to see it with clearer eyes. There are more people in the pool, and we're all seeing more with clear eyes. And that's a mystery that has been, how do we get to Star Trek's time?
Yeah.
Because it was great to start a show, to start a series on Star Trek where that was just in the subtext.
Yeah.
I mean,
Before we get into that, I just want to mention Tim's comment here, the benefit of phone cameras today. You can film anything and use it as evidence. And I think what's happened with George Floyd's video, not only is it coming on the heels of many more examples of that, of black men and women who have been killed needlessly. But it's also because of the technology, this moment was captured and readily shared around the world without any traditional media. It was all new media and social media that allowed that. And you see in this video that there is absolutely no excuse for what happened, for why he was killed. And it is opening
no editing
up
either.
Right.
Yeah,
There's
just a whole movie.
It's
sadly.
led us to have a deeper discussion that I think a lot of people in the black community in the United States, but also in communities of color, have talked about often. And now a lot of white Americans are beginning to understand what this experience has been like. You know, it's. We'll get back to Star Trek in a moment, but one of the things that I have really had to look at myself is how non-diverse my social media following has been. Like the people I follow. I follow a lot of journalists. I follow a lot of Star Trek people. I follow a lot of people in psychology and mental health. And this week, I've really realized how I haven't been following a lot of people of color, but also black voices in all of these communities. Because these voices that have always been there, that have been speaking up, have really been elevated this week. And I've discovered so many blind spots. And in doing so, I have discovered so many more voices and perspectives than I had been exposed to before. And one of the things that I discovered was a YouTuber. Let me see. I wrote his name down in my show notes here. Where is he? Belief in Fatherhood. And he filmed a video. He's a family vlogger, so he films videos about raising his children. I think he has 2 boys and 1 girl. And usually I don't watch family vlog YouTube series because I'm not that interested in it, because it's usually just families going about their day. But this is different because he also speaks to what it's like to be a black family in America. And he filmed a video called "We Had the Talk with Our Sons" about being black in America. And it's a video where he takes, I believe it's a 7 and 9-year-old or 5 and 7-year-old, I can't remember. But he sits them down with his wife and talks to them about how some people might judge them based on the color of their skin, and some people might see them as a danger as a result of this, and what to do. And you see the innocence leave their face as they begin to understand this. And so I never had to think about that. I've never thought about that with my own daughter. And so this week has brought to life for me what it must feel like to now. I'm not black. I've never experienced this myself. But the fear that other people must have on a daily basis of you because of your skin color, and how you must act differently because of that. That's what I've really begun to realize this week. And I think it's just we're having a deeper conversation that I've never seen at this scale before, in this collaborative a way before. Some people are talking about how this does harken back to the 60s, and I think there's some parallels there. At the same time, I think that the collaboration here is a little bit different.
I think I tweeted this week that I've had this thought a few times before, but in 20, 50 years, we may look back at the invention of the iPhone, of all things, smartphones, cam phones, but the iPhone definitely was the revolution point, as being a revolution in social justice, because you could talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, and some people are racist. I still want to believe there's just a great unwashed pool of good-feeling people who just really have a hard time thinking, just the way, the way certain elections have gone in recent years. People were just kind of like, never would have considered that certain outcomes would happen. And, pictures are worth 1,000 words, so I guess videos are worth 1,000,000. Mm-hmm. And you cannot argue with visuals. You cannot argue with, a 30-second clip, a 60-second clip. an 8-minute and 46-second clip. You don't worry about context. It's there. And I think that's what's finally, you hate to say that. You had to say, well, I had to show you a picture to get you to understand. But yes, sometimes that's exactly what, especially when you're talking about a monumental shift. And again, I think there were a lot of people of good faith, good intention, who just could not believe the problem was that wrong. And now what's happening beyond George Floyd, and I guess they were there all along, but we've had the flood. Was it Ahmaud Arbery, the jogger, who was jogging? We don't have video of Breonna who was EMT worker who was shot in her apartment. But they're just in the police, and this is a whole separate thing where we can talk about the militarization, the post-Iraq war militarization of police. Hey, we've got some Army surplus tanks. You guys want them? And that whole mindset that's changed. We don't have policemen anymore. We have war fighters on the streets. But these little snippets of video with white people, with people of all the 75-year-old man in Portland, I believe, and no qualm about, we've totally gotten away from Sheriff Andy Taylor. You know, it's all soft-edged and it's hard-edged when it needs to be, but the needs to be is 1 in a million occasions, not 999,000 occasions out of a million.
Yeah,
it's not the standard operating procedure to be in mob mode, riot gear mode, and that's what's happened. Yes, iPhones have been a revolution, and not just for exposing these moments when they happen, but like all of them, everywhere, and even beyond. We need to focus Black Lives Matter here, because that's what's been the fuse. But these videos are coming wherever. It doesn't matter who you are. You know, young kids. The cops tipping off some Boogaloo boys that they're about to go after the protesters, and you guys better clear out. That was a shocking one from I forget where. Anyway, I know we're going far afield here from Star Trek, but yeah.
Our comment section is also sharing their experience. Jared said, my ex was black. During the time we were dating, he was pulled over 8 times on the same stretch of road while we were on our way to dinner. I was driving. I was never pulled over once. And similarly, Scott says, my husband is half Persian. Before we were married, and he had changed his name, we were singled out for screening at airports all the time. Since he's changed his name to mine, it hasn't happened once in 6 years. So there's a lot of people are sharing their experiences and how similar many of us have experienced to some degree some of these things. So getting back to Star Trek.
I was going to say, Heidi in Europe is saying agree on all this, and in Europe it's increasing, and also against like Muslims.
Yeah.
Who it's so convenient that they can be darker skinned too. I mean, and have an ethnic look. I mean, yes.
So one of the things this is our present, obviously. I want to talk about how we got from this present to the Star Trek future in Star Trek. So. Something, Larry, I think that often gets left out in this discussion about Star Trek's utopian future and how Star Trek has, Earth in Star Trek has eradicated disease and poverty and united together in the peaceful exploration of space. Those are the 3 things that I think make up the Star Trek's utopian future. What I think often gets left out in that is World War III, is that utopian future was really built out of this decay and destruction that Earth experienced, where most governments were in shambles. We see some of this in Star Trek First Contact, the film. Is it mentioned?
That's mainly it. Well, just to jump on here.
Yeah.
In the 60s, we did a Trek Files recently, my podcast at Roddenberry, where we got it back. We went to Route 1, which was Gene's pitch document. And I had Roddenberry on because I wanted to get back at this with everything going on. We say, oh, Star Trek, the show that was so aspirational, equality, racial justice, economic justice, and disease and poverty. And we didn't destroy the Earth, we didn't kill each other, we didn't nuke ourselves. But you go back and read his pitch piece, Gene Roddenberry's document, Star Trek is. And it's all about the format. It's about the captain and the crew, and we're centuries in the future. and here's the kind of adventures we can get into. Nowhere in the actual pitch document that he sold the show with does it say, and Star Trek will be aspirational and it will all be all about diversity and equality. I mean, I think people it may not have been front and center minded. Anybody who stopped to reflect on it might have realized that was all between the lines. But it was interesting how he didn't come in and pound it that this was going to be a show, this way. Now, the minute you get to we're up and running, he's got a contract and he's hiring writers, and you have the writers' guides out for the writers. You see more of that attitude permeating. But it struck me how not only do we get it today, and that's the way Star Trek has evolved. The original audience in the '60s, that was the flashpoint of attraction. Was, oh my God, look at this more perfect future.
Yeah.
Where these issues don't exist, but it wasn't sold that way. It was all in the subtext. And then but there were these '60s strictures, budget we talk about. And one of the things that is in the writer's guide is he says, we do not go back to Earth. We don't talk about which economic system won. We don't talk about anything from Earth. And a lot of that was about budget. Mm-hmm. But a lot of that still in the '60s was, let's not get into let's just show these guys being great guys and gals. And it's the whole thing is they didn't destroy themselves. They didn't nuke themselves. And they didn't poison the planet. So obviously something has happened where everybody learned to get along, and it was always just subtext, and it was always intriguing to the first wave or two of fandom. And occasionally you'd see fan fiction. It wasn't really till some of the movies developed this. We finally went to Earth in the motion picture. We saw gleaming San Francisco. We saw Paris as the president's office in Star Trek VI. So, right. We started, and then in Next Generation is where it really hit. Star Trek IV was the first time we talked about no money, so we were post-scarcity. Well, if you have replicators that can make gold as easily as lead, okay, there you go.
Yeah, just don't think about the economics too much.
Yeah. Well, people have been dwelling on the economics too, but that's another show. But it really wasn't until Next Generation that we really having great Picard speeches, where we worked, as we say in our tags, we work to better ourselves and the rest of humanity. We don't worry about material gain. And he's talking to Lily Sloan, a fearful black woman who has just survived World War III in First Contact.
Yeah.
First Contact really being the first time, aside from mentioning that a World War III happened and so many died, and people wondering if World War III was the eugenics wars, and then come to find out, no, there was the eugenics wars, which was, as we've kind of retconned it, more underground. But World War III was a thing that's coming up in our future in about 30 years, and that's the shambles, the wreckage that Cromwell, that Zephyr Cochrane and Lily Sloan at his side were able to scrounge and scavenge and find some intact nuclear missiles that hadn't fired, and put together the Phoenix and discover warp drive, and bang, we're off and running. So, but yes, from that wreckage. And your idea about it being a cleansing.
Dan, before we get to that,
yeah.
Dan says, wasn't Roddenberry aiming to portray social justice even in The Lieutenant? Stay tuned, Dan. We're going to talk about that.
Dan, just slow down.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that pitch, too. So we're definitely going to get...
Don't telegraph it. Okay.
We're gonna get to that. But, yeah, I mean, I saw
what my point
image.
Is, Ollie, what my point is here is, the idea about prejudice and racism and their take on it and where they live in their time, the 23rd, 24th centuries, it was not a straight through development for Star Trek.
Right.
They hopscotched to the future, and then as the media matured, as the audience matured, they started backfilling that. And it really didn't come along until the 80s movies, and then Next Generation ferociously, and then really nitty gritty with DS9.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing to note, that it was actually in just the show's guiding instructions that they weren't going to go back to Earth. And a lot of the philosophy of Star Trek got filled in over the course
Right.
of time.
As
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
One of the things I've been thinking about is with the original series, what is so progressive about it is seeing representation of the entire world. I think Gene Roddenberry wanted one cast member representing each continent of the each continent of the United States. There's my bias. Each continent of the Earth was going to be represented, I guess, minus Antarctica. So Uhura was representing Africa, and you had Sulu representing Asia. You also had Chekhov. What was so progressive about Chekhov is in the Cold War, you had a Russian serving on the bridge of the Enterprise, of the USS Enterprise. That's a pretty big deal. So
it was as radical as Worf serving on the bridge.
Yeah. And this was what was so progressive about the show. I think Michelle Nichols has famously shared the story that she was going to quit the show, and then was approached by Martin Luther King, who said, "You cannot do this. This is the only show I'd let my kids watch." So, and then the effect that had on Whoopi Goldberg. There's a lot of stories that have been shared there. But one of the things that I've been thinking about is how did we get to that future where they don't really even talk about race? Because it doesn't really seem to matter on Earth. We talk about xenophobia and bias as it relates to aliens, and then we're going to get to DS9. We see some really amazing episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Well, let me get back to the xenophobia. So we have, of course, Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, where which
for years has been everybody's go-to. All the early years of Star Trek, that was the go-to episode on racism, on the nose racism.
Yeah, and I think On the Nose is good because it's Kirk saying, "This is stupid. What you are doing, fighting simply based upon this, is stupid." I think we need that. We need the On the Nose episodes because, again, remember the time. This was the 1960s, right. And
this was I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just gonna say it was a big deal that was going on. But I also want to outline some other things here. We see episodes like Measure of a Man. And the very, really amazing moment of that episode where Guinan is talking to Picard, and she says, "Wow, a race of disposable beings," and evokes slavery. And you see Picard's face completely change because he's being snapped back from the 24th century to the history of slavery on Earth. So they know about this history, and we see this also in the wonderful series. I think it's been mentioned in our comments in many previous episodes, Past Tense from Deep Space Nine, where we see one class of very wealthy people, and at the same time, San Francisco. This could be an image of San Francisco right now, where the homelessness and the plight of people who have less is really completely ignored.
The mentally ill and the jobless, as well as the ideal here and the militarization
and the militarization of the
clueless
police as well.
The clueless, it's brute force. Before they almost kill off the character of Vin there. That's become the thing that everybody, and we haven't even talked about Far Beyond the Stars yet, which is like a historical snapshot it's a mind time travel back to the 50s. There you go. Benny Russell. I mean,
and we also see police brutality there.
Episode and the casting, and having Wei Yun and Ducat be the two corrupt cops, and having all of his well-meaning, well-intentioned, far-sighted science fiction writing white friends, all in the end just be standing by and feeling helpless or not knowing what to do and not really getting his. I mean. Far Beyond the Stars, yes, people think of, but that part of it and the part of Past Tense about the people who knew these were issues and problems, and we thought we had these districts. It wasn't widespread. It was the worse. It was like the district.
Yeah.
It was like a prison for people with less than that were originally set up to be beneficial, but they became convenient, out of sight, out of mind excuses. Where it wasn't just about race. There's all races are in there. But the point was they were put aside, forgotten, and the comfortable class, a lot of them very conveniently thought, or easily conscienced thought that the problem's been dealt with, and they were totally clueless and cut off. And it took, I wish got this slide. It took getting them on the internet at the end, or whatever they called it. Having everyone tell their story to break through that wall. Yeah. Not even so much about racism, but just being cut off. And that's what's wrong. We've talked about the iPhones. It's like the iPhone and everybody's personal ability to document is the same as that everyone locked inside the sanctuary district having access to tell their story one after the other thousands of times.
Yeah.
And having that penetrate the greater majority.
Well, that's
it
probably
the
knock
episode. Through that wall, even of well-intentioned people, to knock through that wall and make an impression that, oh my God, this is happening.
That's probably one of the only episodes of Star Trek that best ties into what we're going through right now, and the ending of that episode with people telling their own story and cutting through directly the empathy there that comes through storytelling, which we are seeing here this week. Like I was describing that YouTuber who talked to his children about the reality of being black. I had a very similar moment there where it was very hard for me to watch because I was imagining what would I do in that same situation. So there's so many parallels there. And then we also have stories like Star Trek does this very well with discrimination between groups of people who are not human. We see this in Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country, with Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. That's impression number 2, folks. You see the discrimination with Klingons and the bias between those two groups of people and the badmiralty, as Dr. Trek likes to say, one of my favorite terms from Trekland. So we see a lot of these stories, but besides Deep Space Nine, I would argue, and maybe the original series with City on the Edge of Forever, we don't get as much discussion of racism or discrimination on Earth. And so here's one thing that I think must have happened. I saw this image on Twitter and I thought it was very relevant for us. Let me see if I can make it bigger. This is a bit of a crash course in some of these topics here. Inequity really being that groups of people are treated differently. Equity, we treat them all the same, but there might be a history that has, or certain circumstances that keep everyone from accessing those resources the same. Equity is keeping those inequities in mind and addressing those so that everyone gets equal access to those resources, and then justice being changing the system, and we see the tree has been straightened out there. So something must have happened between World War III and Star Trek Enterprise. Something must have happened where humanity got together, and as they started rebuilding their governments, rebuilding their cultural structures, their institutions, they moved to some type of justice model that was taking care of all the people whose lives were completely destroyed by World War III. And the new systems that they created were not built on these differences, these perceived differences, these racial differences. That's the quote-unquote original sin of the United States, is we were built on slavery. And as slavery ended, that transitioned to other forms of discrimination. If you haven't seen Ava DuVernay's documentary, The 13th, I think it's actually just called 13th, it chronicles this, and it was only on Netflix, but now Netflix released it for free on YouTube, so you can go watch it right now for free. 13th on YouTube. So something happened where those structures were rebuilt, and that hasn't been chronicled, has it, Larry?
No, not really. I mean, there may be some fan fiction out there, but if it's a case of it's probably a lot akin to what happened in Europe after World War II, I'm going to say, because Europe was so devastated. The aggressors and the innocents, it's like everybody was bombed, and most everyone was bombed and razed with a Z, down to almost nothing. Everything had to be built again from scratch, and all the history, the years of somebody was number 1 and somebody was number 47, or on a global scale, it was like who were the colonial empires and who were their colonies that were less developed or they didn't have modern technology, and so they became colonies. They became like Africa, much of Asia, a lot of South America, Australia even, which starts off as the prison colony. So a lot of places that were the less than places. It took World War II in Europe to start over from scratch, to literally ground zero, square zero, and build again. And in that case, everybody had it. We are now all even in the pile of rubble we're standing in, and that must have been on a global scale what happened after World War III.
Yeah. Just want to mention we're getting some comments about
lots of comments in the chat.
Lots of comments. One that's sticking out is the sexism in the original series, and Dan was mentioning that obviously the original series is arguably rife with sexism, and Linda says, I don't think sexism was really eradicated in Deep Space Nine or in Star Trek until Deep Space Nine. There is a lot of that, and maybe that's something we'll explore in the future. There's a lot of sexism, and that was a big blind spot in Star Trek. A lot of that in the original series, and a lot of that in the Next Generation. Maybe we'll talk about that as well at some point. But yeah, Larry, that's something I wish I could see in other Star Trek stories, is how they created that. I think one of the closest we get is Terra Prime. This is actually, I think, one of the best moments of Star Trek Enterprise, not only because we have RoboCop in it, who also then appears in Star Trek Into Darkness. He loves to play Star Trek villains. It's in versions of Star Trek that are less than beloved. But he that's this storyline of massive xenophobia being snapshot back in this moment of moving forward. We're seeing a big rise in that xenophobia. And one scholar who I've really discovered this week is Ibram Kendi. And he wrote How to Be an Anti-Racist, and I think his first book is called Mark from the Beginning, I believe. But his first book is all about how, as we've made progress in equity, in moving society forward, racism and discrimination has also made progress in subverting that and developing even more sophisticated rationales for racism. And that's what I think Terra Prime really is about. It's about this evolution of humanity's xenophobia.
Look, we mentioned Star Trek VI and the Klingon, guess who's coming to the Klingon dinner.
Yeah.
And the original draft of the dinner scene, they were trying to make a point. Nick Meyer wrote that script with others, but they were trying to make a point by having it very on the nose, typical racist. Did you smell them? Oh, did you see the way they ate? No, I mean, and it was so on the nose that Michelle, George, some of the actors were like, guys, I think this is a little... Now, they were trying to make a point, and sometimes making a point goes right past people to the point of you think it's, in this case, racist, and your level of subtlety. So they dialed it back even from what you see. What you see on the screen is even less than what it originally being on the nose was about, but it still makes the point. But the thing is, it's interesting how Star Trek and the Federation, how Earth and the Federation, let's say, we see these successive waves. Even if, say, a united Earth does away with prejudice and everyone is equal, blacks, whites, Asians, everybody, all the races of Earth are the same. Now here's Earth. Let's just up the plateau, right?
Right.
Now we're all together. Now, the xenophobia is just prejudice against others, whether you want to keep it on a global level of Earth and say xenophobia is fear of the other, and the other happens to be someone of another skin color, someone of another religion, someone just from another place that talks differently than you do, even if you're in the same language.
Yeah.
But now let's take it on a global level. Now you saw xenophobia with well, Vulcans a little bit, but they gave some pushback. But yes, Terra Prime's era is Earth grappling with its prejudice, not about other humans, but now the first wave that you meet.
Yeah.
Vulcans, the Nobulans. I mean, T'Pol and there's the scene where T'Pol and Phlox are bonding because for the first time they feel not welcome on Earth. After you've had this spurt, and it's a great pendulum swing study in human nature. You've had we've had this burst of outward activity, alien contact for nearly 100 years, and now here's a big pushback by Paxton and his gang about the Terra Prime people. Oh no, get rid of all alien influence. Okay, fine. We survived that. We go on. 100 years later, here's Kirk and his crew battling with the next wave out. Klingons are enemies, but there are probably other. We've seen other, since it's Star Trek and it's sci-fi and it can be allegory. Let's not forget that if you're talking about communication with a new species, leads to understanding, and before that, you might have prejudice. You might have outright fear or terror and loathing and longing to the point where you're attacking. Right? That was the other. Communication brings understanding. You could go back and make a case for the Devil in the Dark, and the Horda, being a case of prejudice through misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Right? And then when you have the communication, given it's sci-fi, given it's an allegory, given that you've got to find how to communicate, even if you wanted to. But given that the Temerians, the children of Tamar in Darmok, those ships were about to shoot at each other unless Picard and Dathan could find a way to communicate. So communication, we're lucky here that the only thing we have to worry about is just doing the talking. When you elevate the misunderstanding, miscommunication to a level where you have to figure out how to communicate first, if you don't blow yourselves apart.
Yeah.
So yes, going back to Mother, and then once you make that bridge, oh my God, she's doing our tunneling for us. We understand. We've got little Horda kids running around. I mean,
Dr. Trek, make that bridge. Is that another little subtle? Yeah, I thought so. Well, I did this talk that Trekkies both love and hate. Probably about 7 years ago at this point. It's on YouTube. It's about how to build a Star Trek utopian future. And one of the things that I make a point there, and I'll talk about this when we get to the counselor log, is basically the way we're wired, there's a high probability that if we ever meet aliens and we survive that encounter, we won't have any empathy for them because they're probably look incredibly different than us, and we might not be able to communicate with them. So that communication piece is so important. And another thread, both Night Angel on Twitch as well as Cairo are talking about the economic inequalities and how that leads to prejudice and health disparities meaning different access to healthcare, illnesses affecting different populations differently because of how those populations are treated. And this really speaks to honoring our history. And there's a wonderful episode of Star Trek Voyager.
This is the one that I keep pointing out when people are talking about the more obvious.
Yeah, Larry, can you walk us through this episode a little bit, because I had completely forgotten this episode.
So this is an episode of Voyager, lest we leave out Voyager, that I just think is so insidiously, subversively, powerful, because they come to a planet that's a peaceful planet, and they're all making, Voyager looking for friends every new planet it finds. And they do, and they're all just getting along hunky-dory, and oh, look at our culture, and oh, we're just wonderful, and we share all these values. And through a weird, alien sci-fi mental trick, B'Elanna meets an elderly woman, who shares a memory of just maybe 2 generations ago in the Anaran culture. They basically had a Nazi Holocaust situation going. They had a minority who rejected technology to the point where they were called regressives, and they were made to be their other, and they were systematically hunted and executed. At the same time as they told their population that they were just rejecting technology and they were just dying off. Yeah. And apparently they'd all pretty much been wiped out, to the point where generations later, they don't ignore them in their history, but they're teaching their little kids. Each succeeding generation is taught that they didn't embrace technology and modernism, so they just eventually died out. They totally sanitize and totally cover up the guilt in this ethnic cleansing. All of our modern our language of our time, this basically holocausted their own minority. It's only this elderly woman's memory trick transfer sci-fi thing with B'Elanna, where B'Elanna is living her memories as a young woman with her lover boyfriend, who she eventually turns in. It's like the Sound of Music subplot again. The boyfriend girlfriend, one of them turns the other one in, or tries to, and then deals with the guilt of watching her lover be executed.
Right.
And feeling that, but she survives to get along. But her get back, her karma point, is passing the memory along so it doesn't die, so it's not stamped out. And then B'Elanna first has to figure out what the hell's going on with herself. But when they figure out that it's this memory trap, she tells Janeway. Janeway confronts the planetary culture.
Yeah.
And they still don't accept it. And they say, well, I guess we can't be friends then.
Yeah.
And B'Elanna is just totally ripped up. But she makes a point to go find a young Anaran girl and do the memory thing back with her, because human Klingon hybrids are great alien conduits for everybody, I guess. But she makes sure and passes that along so the story is not lost within their culture. And to me, that was such a great allegory about even people who have reformed, or to some point reformed, that try to paper over the past. If you don't embrace it, say the way the Germans have, the Nazi history, if you don't embrace it and put it out there, your ugly laundry, warts and all, for everybody to see, you run the risk of that pendulum swinging back.
Embracing it meaning not running away from it.
Right.
Teaching the next generation, building it into your culture so that you don't make those mistakes again.
Lessons
and
learned.
you also you change those structures to make it less likely that's going to happen again. And that's what anti-racism is. It's not being racist. It's taking actions that promote equity, that promote justice, so that people are treated the fair. You can't get to that last point. You can't get to that justice point where we're correcting the problems in our worlds without really honoring the history. And I think that's what's so powerful about that episode. And that's also, I was having this discussion with another friend of mine. I did a live stream on the Psych Show yesterday about how media can help us develop empathy. And one of the things he brought up about Star Trek is a criticism that Star Trek can often be seen, especially to many people of color, that it is quote-unquote colorblind. And one of the things we know is there's a danger to not recognizing differences in people, because it can make you more vulnerable to racism, or it can make it really easy for you to deny differences in how people are treated because of racism, but also because of economics, and maybe because of religion, or a wide variety of variables. That we actually need to recognize the differences and how they impact people differently. I see one moment in Star Trek.
It's a little bit like Edith Keeler being a pacifist. But she was a pacifist at the wrong time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Pacifism, being passive, ignoring. Well, I said
pacifist, but you're talking about, yes.
Yeah. And being passive, that's it's, what's the quote from Ibram Kendi? I think it's, being passive is the lifeblood of racism. I'm not doing the quote justice, not doing the quotation justice, but doing nothing is what keeps this whole system going. And Star Trek can often be seen as like it's not recognizing the differences in humanity. And maybe their future is different, but I have hope in one of the episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine where everyone is going to VIX, and Benjamin Sisko does not want to go. And when he's confronted about it, he says, our people were not welcome there in Las Vegas in the 50s. We would have never been allowed in. And there's actually a conversation about that which I think is a conversation that resonates with this world of the Broadway show Hamilton, where this entire white characters have been cast with people of color, and we can have that whole discussion. So I get hope there that the humanity of the future understands this dark past that we've been in. But that is a criticism that Star Trek can often be seen as this colorblind institution.
Right. It's a conundrum that the whole point of Star Trek is to be a show set in the future, which from day one has been, a thankless task, because if you really had a series set 200 or 300 years in the future with humans, how would we even, who in 1966 or in 2020 would have any interest in watching it? Because the humanity it'd be like, well, I mean, we're supposedly watching characters from Shakespeare, from the Elizabethan era, every time we watch a Shakespeare play. But even then, we're watching modern actors, as good a Shakespearean scholar interpreter as they might be. We're still watching 21st century actors do Shakespeare, just the same way that 19th century actors declaimed their Shakespeare. And the same way that Shakespeare is setting tales from ancient and medieval lands, that it's the bias of their time. You know that the characters they're portraying from the Middle Ages and from biblical times they're not accurate portrayals of actual people from that era. So there's a bias there about any time we try to leave our time and actually do an accurate portrayal. We're going in the future this time with Star Trek. So the point of it was to inspire and show a time. The people that say, gee, these issues don't exist then, on one hand, they kind of miss the point, but on the other hand, they have a point.
Yeah.
Relevancy here. And that's when the time travel, the holodeck, the parallel world show, the allegorical shows are meant to be, the half black, half white shows are meant to, even though they're little. That was third season. It's creaky. I apologize for that. But some of the more subtle, nuanced stories about prejudice of different kinds, starting with the Horta even, but bipedal humanoids too, they're a little more subtle, and it's one of the threads of the show. They exist too. But it takes those time travel shows that DS9 did, taking advantage of the fact they had the first black lead character captain, no coincidence there, but and going beyond just mere racism. That's why I love Past Tense. It was like an out of sight, out of mind dimension.
It was so ahead of its time, Larry. Yeah. And it so resonates. If you're watching this and you're unfamiliar with Deep Space Nine, just watch the two-parter Past Tense. You don't need to know any of the history of Deep Space Nine. You don't need to know about the Dominion and the Founders. We could talk about Founders and discrimination on both sides there as well, Larry, on both the Founders' perspective as well, and the very class / race / species hierarchy that they've created in their culture. We can talk about that. We can also talk about the Federation's response and the discrimination there. But you don't need to know any of that for Past Tense.
The limits of sympathy. Here come the Skreans fleeing the Dominion through the wormhole.
Yeah.
So it's a whole race. It's a whole culture of people who are migrants, who are refugees. Yeah. And that touches on that whole issue. Oh, we are so sympathetic for them. Where can we go? Oh, I don't know. We don't know. Can we just... Your planet needs people to help. We'll do the heavy heart, we'll do the work that no one else wants to do. Yeah, we're just getting over this war ourselves. We're pretty poor still. We can't... I mean, that was... Yeah. That goes right by.
And it is important...
The way their skin peels? I mean, that was... Yeah.
And it is important to have these stories. They give us a chance. We've seen some of this. Yeah, I mean, we can go back and forth. This could be a very difficult discussion, Larry. We could talk about the way you and I are talking about this. I'm sure we can dive into language we've used and how that has offended me or you, or in the comments section. Like, this discussion can get very difficult because so many of us in the United States, and I know we have viewers all around the world, and I can't speak to a non-American experience. This is all I've known. But I know in America, it is very difficult to talk about race. It is very hard to be anti-racist when you're living in a society that has so much racism. It's hard. So we need stories that that bypass all of these things that make it hard for us to talk about and give us allegory. I wrote an article for Quartz for the 50th anniversary of Star Trek called The Psychology of Star Trek's Utopian Future. I think that's what it's called. And one of the things I outlined there is how fictional stories are able to bypass all of the political identity breaks that keep us from talking about this stuff. So we need those allegories. Absolutely, 100%. We need that.
It's the same thing, the whole allegory story is what Gene's idea, which I don't want to jump into the K3 factor, but
yeah,
because of 60s TV censors and not touching, radical, not touching controversial, because economics is driving TV. It's advertised. Gene used to say, "We're not here to tell you stories. We're here to sell toothpaste." Basically, that's what he said. We're selling cars and toothpaste, guys. So the parallel worlds concept, even though we hoot about the Roman planet and the Nazi planet and the gangster planet now, but yes, those allegories, the computer war planet, those were allegories to tell the story, tell the moral that he wanted to tell to get around the censors. But at the same time, yes, rather than banging on an issue with somebody face to face where it's intractable, and I can think of 10 or 15 right off the top of my head in current society. Instead of banging here, you do an end around and you come over here to this safe place and tell a story, and then you hope maybe some Shaka, his eyes open. I'm not doing my Temerian right, but his eyes open, whoever it was. That somebody on the backside turns around and maybe sees how you got to there. So yes, it's like a deceptive. It's like it's like the magician, or it's like the teacher with the tantrum throwing kid. You do the distraction to get to the destination, and hopefully the understanding comes with it. There's got to be some fancy psychological term for that. Don't tell me.
It probably is, and it's not in my head right now. Jared just mentioned
so many.
This is a great example, Jared. Ollie just reminded me how I have also noticed recently how the U.S. seems to have commandeered the term American to mean people from the United States only, when there are 35 countries in America.
I don't know about recent
citizens.
I'd say for 100 years, but yeah.
Yeah. Let's go back in time. But this shows us our we all have one way of looking at the world, and the world is a very big place, and there are many ways to understand the world and our beliefs, and that this gets back to IDIC, and we're going to talk about IDIC a little bit later. And this is where I love our community here, and I love these conversations because we are international, and that can also make it difficult. Because I will say things where I am putting, as we say in the United States of America, where I'm putting my foot in my mouth. But this is also how we learn and grow, is if we can trust each other to, instead of attacking to each other, bringing these things up in a way that we can learn from each other. So, Jared, thank you for sharing that. And it's something that I'm going to think about. Larry, this has been the longest briefing room that we've ever had. Can we open up the counselor's log?
Let's go to the counselor's log, please.
All right. So the counselor's log. This is where Can
I just say real quick? This has also been one of the most amazing chats. They seem to get better every week, and we've got some uncomfortable. I just want to say there's some uncomfortable feelings being exposed. I'd love to sit down and have a conversation with, and I mean everybody in the chat here. I know we won't. Just as always, we don't get to everybody.
Yeah.
And just because the chat is rolling by does not mean that I don't wish I could sit down. I'm sure you too. Sit down and take all of these. These could a fourth of this chat could be a whole panel in itself at a convention.
Sometime. Yeah. We could do a deep dive into so many of these comments, like what Tim just said. Star Trek as a television series has come a long way. To one moment in line from Captain Pike in the cage where he comments he can't get used to a woman being on the bridge. That is a big blind spot in the origin of Star Trek, in the sexism we have there, and the uniforms and all of that. And there's
remember, as we say that, let's not blast Star Trek. Let's blast the audience and the culture at the time, because the whole point was to have a woman on the bridge and have Pike, that's a line that's supposed to reach out to the audience in 1965 and say, yes, we know there's a woman on the bridge.
Yeah, number one.
You'll get used to it. And we've been retconning that ever since, but yes. Yeah.
So, for the counselor's log here, this was a bit of an impossible task for me, and
solve
yeah, right.
racism in 1 hour.
This is where in the counselor's log I take a look at things from a psychological science perspective and a mental health perspective, and do a little bit of a deeper dive. And I was thinking, how can I speak to the psychology of American racism as well as the mental health impact that has on people who are affected by it, which is all people? Well, I'm going to just say a few things. I'm going to say a few things because there's no way I can cover all of it and do it justice. But one of the things that I want to say is humans are wired, once we are born, to understand the society that we are in. Humans are wired to understand the groups of people that they frequently see. So babies are quite good at differentiating between the faces of people that they see, of all faces, of all backgrounds. But as time goes on, babies start to show only an ability to differentiate between the faces that they often see. So right now, right there, babies are beginning to understand who is in their group and who is not in their group. And if their group has lots of different types of people, they will be able to differentiate that. But if it doesn't, they begin to lose that ability. And another thing that young children are naturally wired to do is understand status, is understand roles, and understand power. And you can understand how this is a safety mechanism that all humans need, that babies really need to know who is it that gives them food, who is it that takes care of them, who is it that could potentially hurt them, all of that sort of stuff. Babies and toddlers and kids, they're really wired to understand these relationships. It also means that if a child is growing up in a culture where where they only see one type of person, or the messages that they're getting is only a certain group of people have power, these tend to be the people who have the most recent resources, they begin to pick up on those things. So the environment that we grow up in, who has resources, who has power, who has the greatest access to different things, these things are imprinted upon us. And while we can overcome those things through contact with other people, through understanding and empathy, if we don't deal with the larger problems of resources and segregation, these patterns persist. So there's so much research that has shown that on a resume, two people with the exact same qualifications, if there's a name that sounds more black, or if there's a name that sounds more like a ethnic minority or a person of color, they're less likely to get hired or invited back to an interview.
Arabic, whatever.
Yeah, these we learn associations automatically as kids about the culture we're in, and if there are big problems or biases in our culture, those things get imprinted upon us, and they're hard to break as time goes on. So, and man, Larry, there's so many things I want to say here, but one of the things I want to say is, my background is I'm a anxiety expert. That's what I do, and for so long, anxiety has been taught to be a false alarm, and we help people to learn through experiences how to manage those false alarms. Mm-hmm. But for a lot of people who, especially a lot of Black Americans who live in the United States, a lot of the anxiety, the chronic stress, the trauma they've experienced is less about these false alarms, but it's about these real alarms.
The true alarms. Right.
The true alarms that we have talked about in the beginning of the show, the police brutality, the discrimination, the being seen as a fear. So there's a lot to do here, a lot of work. I'm not saying we're naturally racist. What I am saying is we are naturally wired to understand the social world we're in, and if that social world is built on structures that have racist policy, we will learn those, and we will perpetuate those unless we learn differently. So that's my counselor's log, Larry. I could spend a whole semester talking about those things and what to do.
You could spend a whole degree program.
Oh my gosh! But maybe it's time to go K3.
K3. He went all K3 on me.
We got a really great K3 for us, Larry. So why don't you dive in?
Can you put the
oh yeah, the image? Yeah. Let me bring it up. We are producing our own show. I wish someone else was producing this, so I wasn't on air at the same time. K3 image is right here, Larry. I got it right here. I'm gonna put it up right there.
I meant the K3 slide.
But, the K3 slide. Oh yes, no, did I spoil your K3? Boom, we got K3 factor.
Okay,
right
now hold it there just a second.
Okay, I'm holding. Something's happening. Larry's doing something.
I'm trying to say that third, the second scale. This is, of course, it's the original series biology biobed, right? Monitor there. The second one over was labeled K3. It's the only factor we can find for mental health in the original series, aside from a psychotricorder, whatever that is. I guess it was attuned to neural waves or whatever. But no, it says the brain index, and so I use K3 to tie in a deep dive of Star Trek with our topic of the week. And boy is ever, because I've been scanning our comments here, and I watch the online threads. I just know how people talk. So many people, so many fans who love Star Trek. And anytime we get into a political discussion or a social justice discussion about Star Trek, and we talk about Star Trek always, as we have been, talking about that was the roots of the show, there's pushback about, well, I don't think that's overtly what Star Trek is about, and how do you read that? And that's why I bring up the episode we did on the Trek Files with Rod, where we went back to the sales pitch for Star Trek originally and said, look, we took a look at it and said, look, he's selling the show, describing what it will be. Nowhere does he say, hey, this is going to be an aspirational champion of diversity and equality. There's no agenda to it at all. It just lays out the format of this space show, and here's what they're going to do. And he's just trying to get over the hump of selling the idea that there could be a show running around in space that would be believable and also producible on a budget, right? Mm-hmm. And then here's the kinds of stories we could tell. And he lays out some springboards, and some of those get at it. He's got one where there's like 30. Some of the shows got developed, some of them didn't, and some of them thankfully didn't. But he's got one show where it's a reverse old pre-Civil War South, mm-hmm. where the blacks are in power and the whites are the slaves. And it's just, that's on the nose. But, I mean, he's got some, if you read some of those, you get it. But nowhere is there an implicit, we're going to be a champion of this. So you could read that document mm-hmm. and say, gee. But as Rod and I discussed, you could also look at that as he's trying to sell a show to American networks who may not be filled with inherently racist, studio executives and programming people. But they are people who are very much aware they're in a capitalist system, who are very much aware they were worried about this in the 60s, and then things exploded because it had to be as 1968 happened, and on and on. But they were very keen to not diminishing the profit line. Mm-hmm. If we do that, we'll offend the stations in the South, and nobody will carry the show. If we do this, we'll offend the Jewish population. We'll offend the Catholic viewers. We'll offend somebody. That lowest common denominator of blandness is what was affecting a lot. So Gene loved Gulliver's Travels. He loved Swift's stories and the allegory there, because it was very subtle. And I'm sure he was attracted to that as a storytelling device. And he wanted to do a space show because he'd been a pilot. He loved that kind of thing. Yep. And he pitched he tried to develop all kinds of shows. he did his, climbing the ladder as a producer, he finally sold his own show. He'd been a writer on Have Gun Will Travel. He'd been a writer for lots of things in early TV. He finally sold his own show. It was called The Lieutenant.
Yep.
It was about a young judge advocate general, played by Gary Lockwood, i.e. Gary Mitchell, and from 2001 also. He was the lead. It was about a young, bright-eyed law student in the Marines, in the JAG Corps, at a fictional Marine base, which was really Camp Pendleton, California. He had the full cooperation of the Marines and the Department of Defense. They used soldiers as extras. They used the base to film on. It was perfect. And he told all these, and he wanted to tell adult stories. He didn't want to, he was Gene. He didn't want to do
adult stories, meaning serious drama.
Serious drama.
Yeah.
Not easy, not easy drama, but also doing some issue shows. Okay, all well and good. They at times made the Pentagon a little uncomfortable, but they went along. For the 21st episode of the season, back when they were 25, 26 episodes long, he wrote an episode, actually, a writer named Lee Irwin, that I just found out was born in the town where I went to college in Oklahoma. So Lee Irwin, who wound up also writing Whom Gods Destroy, third season, and many, many other shows, was a working writer. Lee Irwin wrote an episode about racism. A white Marine and a black Marine cannot get along. They went through the story process. The studio and the network both said, this is too controversial. We cannot air this. And he pushed and pushed and
Here's
pushed.
an image of that
they
episode.
filmed it. Yes. Yeah. Gary Mitchell there on the left. Before Starfleet. He was in the Marines. You didn't know that. But the point is that not racism, yes, but letting the structure of the time, the economic base, even if you wanted to, even if there were sympathetic people along the way who thought this would be an awesome show, I totally agree with you. But just like Benny Russell's writing team, just like the people that Dax was hanging with in Far Beyond the Star, in future past tense, all the people that wanted to help but they weren't quite there.
Right. They
made the show. They filmed it. The network refused to pay for it. The studio refused to pay for it, and most of all, the Pentagon did not want we've had integrated armed forces since 1948 in Harry Truman after World War II. It's not that the Pentagon was racist; they just did not want that problem to blow up. So this episode, not only was it not funded, it was not aired. The Pentagon pulled its support of the show, the Marine Corps. The show was canceled after that. Like they had 2 or 3 more episodes to show. It was not picked up again. It so pissed off Roddenberry that he couldn't tell a story about, or we're talking about other things. Why can't I talk about this? I've got characters who are Asians. They get by, it's like we tell things, but this white-black racial divide issue had so touched a nerve, even by people who weren't racist, but they went along with the system.
Weren't racist, right?
Yes, I'm air quoting.
Yeah.
That they felt like they had to go along with the system. It so pissed him off. He said, "Well, damn it, then I'm going to tell these stories, but my people aren't going to be black and white. They're going to be purple and green, or polka dot, and we'll put them on alien planets, and I'll still get the point across, and the censors will let me do it." And that was really the spark that led to. Right. That led to Star Trek. So your K3 factor here today is, yes, go through the entire pitch document for Star Trek. You can't find any overt progressive idealism in there anywhere as part of the show, but that's exactly what made Gene finally take the idea off the shelf and go out and try to sell the damn thing. And he did.
I love that explanation, Larry.
Can I double down on the K3? Real fast?
Yeah.
Can you put the picture back up?
Oh, put the picture back up? Yes. Boom. K3.
Now, our black and white picture.
Oh, yeah.
What's amazing is this episode was not seen until years later when it was part of DVD packages, and it was on some special, the retro channels. The white racist Marine was played by Dennis Hopper. And Lieutenant Boma there, Don Marshall, is playing the Black Marine, and Don Marshall's girlfriend, fiance, the Black Marine's fiance in her first acting role, Nichelle Nichols.
Boom. There we
Boom.
go. This is, Larry, you have a way of bringing all these webs of everything together.
We connect the dots.
So,
I didn't invent the stuff, but we just connect the dots.
You connect the dots. I really appreciate that.
That's what we do in Trekland.
I mean, it also helps us to understand why we saw the vision of Star Trek that we saw in the original series. It also helps us to understand how that philosophy could evolve into the Next Generation, and then and all of the subsequent sequels series that were created without Gene Roddenberry, how they were able to jump onto those ideas. And this is where, Larry, if you and I can vent for a second and probably alienate some people.
We should start venting. We haven't done it enough.
Yeah, I know. The pushback that people have had against Star Trek Discovery for going too far, for being too diverse, for embracing too much diversity, for being, social justice warriors.
Ali.
Yeah.
Did you know that the entire first 8 minutes and 47 seconds of Discovery was two women of color alone in a scene together?
Yeah. Oh my.
For minutes and minutes and minutes and minutes.
That it's always been a part of Star Trek. This is what IDIC means: infinite diversity and infinite combinations. This is when it's introduced on screen in the original series, IDIC. This is why it was introduced, because Gene had something to say, and this is the only way that he could say it. It's always been, if passivity is the heartbeat of racism, diversity has been the heartbeat of Star Trek, and it hasn't always gotten it right. And we know that with sexism. We know that with what is that episode? One of the worst episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation that is extremely
Code
racist.
Of Honor.
Code of Honor. Star Trek hasn't always gotten it right.
Yes.
It's
and you know what? Code of Honor, can I just say real quick? Code of Honor that we all love to is, oh my God, like they're just these Africans on a planet. So totally stereotypical. Code of Honor started out as the best of intentions, trying to be a character exploration for Tasha Yar. And it was like this, it was a case of the left hand, the right hand, and the middle hand did not, and it was an early show, they did not gel, and a lot of unfortunate decisions all piled up into this thing, a train wreck, that by the end of the time you're like, was nobody paying attention here? So yes, absolutely. But it didn't start out to be that way, which is sad. Which is, again, another cautionary tale, right?
Well, and this is where this is something I want to talk about. This is actually a very good segue into our away mission.
Thank God.
This is the
on the
part
show here. Your away mission implies that we've actually got some takeaways we can put into real life.
I hope so. That's what I try to do with the away mission, is give you all something that you can do to practice this. And so this is something I've been working very hard on this week myself. And here's the thing. The way we talk about racism and being racist in the United States of America, Jared, I'm trying to say United States of America as opposed to just American, is we tend to present it as an identity that person is racist, and you are racist, this institution is racist. And something, again, I've been inspired by How to Be an Anti-Racist, and I've begun to read this book by Ibram Kendi. And one of the things he talks about, he is this black historian at American University, and he opens that book talking about his own racism and how he was speaking at this oratory competition in high school and giving a very anti-black racist speech, and he didn't even realize he was doing it. And so he talks about how we are all capable of saying and doing racist things. Sometimes while we're also capable of saying and doing anti-racist things. Racist things meaning saying things that talk about differences between people, and anti-racist things which are about promoting equity between people. People should be treated the same way, and we should do away with institutions that discriminate, and we should rectify the problems that we have in our society, the inequality we have in society. So my away mission for this week is for us to start understanding that racism, it's something that you do. It's not for most of us, racism is not an identity, but we are all capable of saying and doing racist things, and we're all capable
unintentionally is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely unintentionally. We might not even realize that we're doing it. And if you've said or done something racist, congratulations, you're a human being. We struggle with group differences. Our history is of small tribal groups. We struggle with this. We've come a long way. And that's also something that gives me incredible hope about our species, is we are able...
You and Gene both.
I'm in very good company then. What gives me incredible hope, and what separates us, I mentioned *Sapiens*, the book, a few weeks ago in one of our first shows, but what gives me so much hope is, as a species, we're able to collaborate beyond our tribes. Most animals aren't really able to collaborate beyond their bloodline, their families. They can't really collaborate beyond 100 people. But look at the space mission. That's thousands of people have collaborated, from the people who mined the ingredients that leads to the creation of the spaceship, to the people who have done the math, to the people who are sitting in those vehicles. It's thousands and thousands of people who have collaborated together. We can do this as a species. It is hard work, but we are able to work together across our tribes, across our bloodlines, across our communities, across beliefs, across these different racial groups. So it's possible, but what it means is we have to recognize that we can all say and do racist things. We can all be a part of institutions and organizations that say and do racist things. And we're also, the hope about this is every day is another opportunity to be anti-racist. So what's the away mission? Well, two things. Number one is, if this is something you are less familiar with, if this is something you're beginning to understand this week or in recent times, that's okay. Welcome to this journey of being more, as we talk about in this show, of bettering yourself. It starts with really understanding the history. This gets back to that Voyager episode. What's the name of that Voyager episode, Larry?
That I mentioned, remember?
Is that what it's called, Remember?
Yes.
That's
pretty on the nose title.
Yeah. It gets back to Remember. So we can't move forward if you don't have a shared understanding of our past. So if you want the easiest introduction to this as it relates to racism in the United States, watch 13th. It's free. It's on Netflix. Ava DuVernay's documentary. It's wonderful. Watch that. It's a great introduction to this. Then think about this. I know it's overwhelming. There's so much to do. What can you do in your community, whether that means where you work, whether that means in your family, whether that means with your friend, to not be passive? When you see something that is racist, what can you do to not be passive? That's a thing that I think we can all take away from this is, it's not enough to not do anything. It's not enough to not be racist. We have to be anti-racist, which means stand up for equity. So what I'm doing to share with all of you, I've been hesitant to talk about this stuff on YouTube, on my channel, because every time I have been hit by a wall of racist comments, of hateful comments that are trying to shut me down. You often don't see them because YouTube filters them, but I see them. and sometimes there's emails. But I can't be passive about that anymore. I just can't, because if I'm passive, it's contributing to the problem. So think about, just in your life, in your community, what can you do to stand up, get educated about this, and then what can you do to not be passive, to be active in promoting the solution? It's not a clear away mission, Larry, but it's the best I've got, because there's no clear answers here.
If there was an easy answer, we would have moved past this ages ago.
Yeah.
I saw, and I'm going to apologize. I've seen so much. On one hand, we're diving into our chat. We've got an amazing chat crowd, and I think we've had people who were uncomfortable. We've got people who weren't popular. We've got people who have come and gone. I saw one, and I also have seen some things that are worth getting out there and talking about that we can't get. So Scott, coming in from my page on Facebook, he said something I meant to mention, which is, and when we were talking about the studies of babies and infants and the learning, totally led into this, not Star Trek, but it was very bold for the time in the late 40s, right after World War II. Of all things, Rodgers and Hammerstein in South Pacific, that song, You've Got to Be Carefully Taught, like, as we said, babies very quickly pick up on, they're not ascribing judgments and values. They just know what they see around them, what they hear. But even then, they're not, that's learning. Yeah. Babies are born as a blank slate. And the song, You've Got to Be Carefully Taught, is all about how, racism it was all set in the South Pacific with Asian, Islanders in the World War II, intersection with the Europeans. But that's the point. Somebody else said, though, that may have been Scott too. So I'm apologizing. We're not scrolling all the way back. Someone said they'd always looked at racism as just a waste of time. Like, how much time is lost, how much energy is lost into fighting all that, when the world could just. It's kind of like when we have a project and we procrastinate on something, we spend all this time dithering, we could just get the damn thing done faster. Although I would say prejudice is a weaponized form of not procrastination, but time wasting.
Well, and I would say it's a waste of time, except for those for whom it benefits. And if you look at the origin of the United States, it's built on slavery. It was one of the most economically profitable endeavors of this country. It just also happened to be incredibly inhumane and destroyed generations of people. So I think that's what we also have to look at, is how stupid it is, yes, and also what's it doing and how is it impacting society.
For some people, it's not stupid at all.
Yeah. And while babies are born with this blank slate, we've also sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally created systems that perpetuate and accelerate those differences. The University of California just did away with the SATs. And one of the reasons why I did it is because they found the SAT to be a very racially biased test, that it does very well for people who have access to the resources to prep for it. But that's really all it's testing, is how well prepared, how many resources people have to prepare for the SAT. So
to prepare for a test.
To prepare for a test.
And, they've even expanded that, not just racial bias, but just cultural bias and socioeconomic bias.
Yes.
It's also, you say that, it's like right now, in the Corona time, we've shut down schools with the emphasis on online learning, and people are starting to count the millions of school kids. The whole world is not on. The internet age is awesome. It's dangerous and fraught with difficulties, and it's exposed a lot of ugliness and dangers. But it's also been wonderful. So it's a tool. But how many people have no access to it? How many kids have been totally left behind because they had no internet access? And
or inadequate internet access.
Oh yes. So, yes.
I've done a few assemblies at schools in recent months, because now it doesn't matter if you're physically there or not. It's all over Zoom, and you can see the inequity. Whereas before going to school, at least people were in the same place. Now their homes are exposed, and their internet connection speed is exposed. You can tell who is sheltering in place in a log cabin in a faraway place versus who doesn't have a lot of space, maybe is living with a lot of family, and also has unstable internet. Not only can you see that, but the unstable internet, it's such a blatant example of differences in access that they're not able to access the same class and lecture as other people can because the internet is so spotty, because there's economic inequality here.
It's like showing up to school in shabby clothes.
Yeah, and you can't hide that. And worse yet is schools haven't quite figured out a way for also those who struggle with mental health and struggle with being exposed and being on camera. Schools have kind of required that your video has to be on so they can prove you're actually there. I can't remember who. There was a girl somewhere who figured out how to make her Zoom background a video of her pretending to pay attention. So she played this and then actually like left school. So like there are these real problems.
She's playing Moriarty. She's got her own.
Right. She's got her own holodeck play. Yeah. I love that. So, there are real problems there. But the coronavirus and COVID-19, which was the genesis of this show, has exposed inequality. And we know the coronavirus has differentially impacted communities of color, specifically Black Americans, but also Latinx Americans, people in the United States, again, people who have less access to resources, people whose communities have been neglected for decades are the ones who are worst impacted by coronavirus.
Which is amazing because coronavirus, we say that it's exposed so much, but it's a virus. It has the least agenda.
Yes. Anything
operating in the world. It doesn't care what it hits, which is exactly why it's so revealing.
It has exposed every fracture in our societies. It also has exposed some of the best parts of our societies. And I think, Larry, we would be remiss to say that the protests that have occurred not only in the United States, but across the world have been almost exclusively peaceful. The news really likes to show looting and things like that. But
well, it's good TV. It's bad TV. Social policy. And I will say that the last few days, most of the media I've watched have realized the power of being seduced by the looting. Yeah. So you're watching 5% or 2% of the crowd getting 99% of the attention. Yeah. And there's been now it's turned into, we'll keep a camera there if things become newsworthy, but look, here's the thousands who are just doing a die-in, or here's the thousands taking a knee, or here's the thousands all around the world.
Yes.
In foreign cities.
Yes.
So yes, I think there's been an evolution even in the last 7-10 days, but that is an issue that the dirty underside gets all the attention.
And I think it gives me hope to see how much we have been united, not only in trying to stop the coronavirus and COVID-19, but also how much the world is uniting around this issue of racism and discrimination. And that gives me hope in all of this when it gets back to that utopian future that we were talking about. I always believed meaning like the last 10 years, but I thought that our version of Star Trek's utopian future would come through climate change, that this catastrophic, dangerous event, which will impact every single human being on this planet, this would be the catalyst. This would be our first contact moment where we realize
equalizer? Yeah.
Yes, this would be the great equalizer. That means, like, look, whatever country you're from, whatever your background, we have to work together to solve this. And the only way we're going to solve this is through everyone really uniting together. I thought that was going to, and I thought that wouldn't happen until it really starts to break apart our economies. Because that's when the rich countries, and also some of the rapidly developing countries who are rapidly burning more carbon would realize, oh my gosh, we have to do something about this. That's what I believed. Now I'm thinking, gosh, is this our moment the coronavirus, how it has really impacted our global economy, exposed all of the problems in terms of our healthcare, our access, the disparities that exist, and now also the world in so many ways uniting around these issues of racism, discrimination, tolerance, diversity, equity. Is this it? Are we getting there?
You're such an optimist because in my heart of hearts, global warming, yeah, global racism and inequality, yeah. There's times when I think that we will never, ever, ever become one with no others.
Yeah.
Until we get to transfer our other to the first. I mean, I hope it's Vulcans, but I've often thought that, and assuming it's not a first contact that ends in us being obliterated. I always like to go with Gene, that thought that if any civilization that advanced far enough not to blow itself up had to be far enough along to get to the point of maturity where it was an interstellar, travel, where if it could go among the stars, that means it had already proved its own survivability to itself. So hopefully they would be interested in making contact, not in conquest or obliteration. So that's all the dystopian, Independence Day type movies are one thing. The Day the Earth Stood Still are the other kind. But the Martians invading or whatever. I'd like to go with that. So assuming that we had, well-intentioned visitors, I've often thought that until we could transfer our other from one of each other, different religion, different colored skin, something here, that the great unifier among us, it's like when a country has internal political divisions, and the moment, you're attacked from outside, then everybody rallies around the flag and faces the enemy. Or dictators make up a fake attack from the outside to unify their people under them. Either way, I didn't know that humanity as a whole on Earth, Sol 3, would ever unify until we had that moment. And then I was kind of like, well, I hope I can trust Gene to think that they're going to be peaceful, and, that our most unifying moment is becoming cannon fodder for an invading alien. So I would gladly go with backing away from global destruction or racism because it will happen a lot faster.
Well, so there's a lot here.
Hope that wasn't too twisted.
No. I think there's a lot here to unpack. So, we're getting in the comment section. Linda is talking about how more viruses might be released. The melting of the permafrost is a concern. There are thousands of year-old viruses.
Constantly pushing back the frontier and having that human-animal interaction in place.
Yes, and that's one of the things as we push farther out, as we push our civilization farther out, we're getting in contact with other animals that carry viruses that we have no immunity to. That's where the novel coronavirus probably came from, is contact that we shouldn't have had. And as our polar ice caps are melting, there are viruses frozen in them that are thousands of years old that we probably have no immunity to. So the future really relies upon us working together, not only to curtail our advances as a species, but also to have a united front to tackle these problems.
Because they're inevitable.
They're inevitable, absolutely. The more we have expanded the reach of humanity, the more it requires cooperation across tribal lines, national lines, all of these different things that divide us. Otherwise, we're not in good shape.
You talking about the things that don't turn up when you're in space looking back at Earth?
Well, so that's the thing I wanted to talk about, Larry.
See all those lines drawn.
If people are very interested in this, in the research on this, on why haven't we made contact with alien life, Vox has a series called Explained, which is quite good. Not only their anxiety episode, which I highly recommend, where you might see a familiar face in there, but they have an episode on alien life. And LeVar Burton actually narrates this episode. And he talks about the research into and the theories behind alien life and why we haven't encountered it right now. And there is this hurdle hypothesis that is there a hurdle to interstellar contact that not only we haven't overcome, but that other species haven't overcome. Is there a hurdle that once you develop the technology that might allow you to make contact with other species, does it also create a existential threat to that species as well? Whether it's nuclear war, whether it is some other form of destruction, and I hope we're not. I hope that is not true.
That we faced with harnessing the atom,
Right.
in the 40s. Oh,
Right.
look at this tremendous power. We can light up the entire planet, or
Yep.
we can kill the entire planet.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So, if people are interested, it's a fantastic documentary that explores all of those things. But that hurdle hypothesis has really stuck with me. Is what is going to be our hurdle to get there, and are we going to be able to cross it? And I think the 21st century is going to be very revealing in that. Not only Star Trek's 21st century, but our timeline as well.
Name of that series was what again?
Vox is Explained. And I think it's the specific episode is Alien Life. I think it's from their first season of Explained.
Is this on a streaming?
It's on Netflix. Yeah. And I
it's on-
think they have some clips of it on YouTube if people are interested. Scott says, have you seen LeVar's Instagram story from yesterday or the day before, telling a story from his USC days? It's really enlightening and beautifully told because he's LeVar. Yeah, absolutely. Larry, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, speaking of LeVar Burton, one of the core memories I have from my childhood is every year my family sat down and we watched Roots, which was probably LeVar Burton's first role, I think.
That was his, yes.
Yeah.
To put it mildly, that was his breakout, yes.
Yeah.
To the point where when Next Generation, people don't believe this, but I saved the AP story. When Next Generation was announced, and it didn't matter what the billing order for the cast was, when they just talked to people on their star power, Next Generation has been announced with LeVar Burton, the star of Roots, a kid who is in Stand By Me, and a British Shakespearean guy you may know from Dune, and some other people. And that was the way, but it's like the only name in the cast people knew was LeVar because of Roots.
LeVar and Will, absolutely.
Yeah, it was only his one thing. You knew it, and it had only been a year or two before.
Yeah.
The kid from Stand By Me, and people went, "Oh yeah, that one."
No, not that one. The other one. Yeah.
The narrator kid.
Yeah. I know. It's Roots was core in my understanding of American history with slavery. And someone in the comments previously we put it on screen, but when it comes to history, it's so important to not only know what we're taught in school, because the history we're taught in school is really, it's sanctioned by the government, by state curriculum. It is written by, quote unquote, the victors of history, right? So it's so important to get history from multiple contexts, which some people might get in college if you have the privilege to go to college and study that, but not all of us do. And it is important to hear the history of people who have experienced persecution, which we've talked a lot about Black Americans in the United States. We haven't talked about indigenous people, American Indians. This country is not only built on the back of slavery, but it's also built on the genocide of people who lived here for hundreds of years before any settlers came to the United States.
The genocide in mostly free land. Yes.
Yeah. So it's history is tough. We have to understand where we came from to understand where we're going and the challenges
we can't Inara this.
Yeah.
From Voyager. Yeah.
Larry, there is so much. Tim
did you ever officially put up the hailing?
I did. I opened the hailing frequencies. I subtly opened them.
The hails are open.
Yeah, the hails have been open for a while here. Tim says
the hails are alive with the sound.
The hails are alive with the sound of DMs. Patrick Stewart was the most well-known here in the UK due to his theater work. Was Patrick Stewart a well-known actor at the time in the United Kingdom as it relates to The Next Generation?
I see Royal Shakespeare Company on stage. He may have done some. I mean, he was in oh, the Shakespeare series filmed. Was he? Is it I Claudius? He was in. He was Septimus in I Claudius. I'm totally going on.
I mean, that sounds right. I have no idea.
This was seen in the States and probably showed in the. I don't know. We need some of our Brits to.
I know Klingons really love it, but I'm not a huge Shakespeare guy. I love things that are based on Shakespeare. I love West Side Story. I love a lot of those other takes, but I never quite got into.
So here's a name I try to say hello to our new people in the chat. I do that on my own Trekland on Tuesdays live and all, but I'm losing track here, which is great. So on YouTube, Lazarek Majdi said there's a lot of anger and fighting in the world nowadays, before Corona and increasing after. Any explanation?
Yeah, so that's a good question.
Scott says yes, it was I Claudius. Yay. Okay. But yeah, it's cause to me it just feels like there are pendulum swings, and maybe that this is these are growing pains. Well, if we could not blow ourselves up, this could be. So
Steven Pinker is a psychologist out of Harvard who came out with a book a few years ago about violence, and looks at violence from the beginning of our species to now. And if you take that long perspective, actually, the 20th century is one of the most peaceful centuries that we've ever experienced. And violence over the course of our entire species is actually down, tremendously has come down. And so the average person walking outside in the world is far safer now than you were 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, and going all the way back. So violence is actually down, big picture perspective. I think what's happening now is, as we make progress and as we become a bit more global and as different groups of people are interacting together, like right now, we have, if we could look at the analytics here and to see where everyone is coming from in the world, this is an international audience. Like it would be impossible 10, 20 years ago for Larry and I to host a conversation that has people from all over the world at the same time. That also means our beliefs, our backgrounds, our biases, they're all colliding too. So diversity is hard. It's better.
That's the story of social media, period. Yeah. We've gone global, yay. We've gone global, oh my.
Yeah. Yeah, right. That's a good summary of it. Yeah. You know, diversity is having a diverse team and a diverse organization is better. It makes your organization stronger because people are coming in with different perspectives. The more diversity you have in perspectives, the better you are able to solve problems. It also creates more conflict. We have to build up our muscles for working through that conflict. That's what we're trying to do here. So some of that pushback you might be seeing is related to our progress. We make progress and our conflict changes and becomes a little bit different. And as we mentioned earlier, as we make progress towards anti-racism, racism also makes progress in thwarting that. So it's a challenge, but big picture, humanity is doing way better right now than we ever have in our past.
I just wanted to say we're inhaling frequencies. We have not reminded folks.
Yeah.
The chat's wonderful, guys, but we would love to have some camera calls on Skype. You can Skype in at Life Support Live Host. Let us know you're trying to call, and we'll see if we can get somebody on camera with us. Can you go full frame just for a second, Ali?
Full frame meaning what? On me?
I might if we get a call, I might get bumped out anyway for a second. Full frame on you for just a second. I want to adjust something here.
Sure. Let's see. We're getting some comments. Jana is and Tim are talking about Dune, and something I have a hard time admitting here is Dune is something I've only seen parts of. I've only seen it. I haven't seen the whole thing altogether. So Yeah.
Okay, I'm back.
Okay, Larry is back, and I was trying to cover for you, Larry. Let me bring you back into the fold here. All right, I'm gonna get you full and get us on the right sides over here. Larry, why don't you cover me for a second while I see? I think we have a caller. I'm gonna get set up with them. Yeah. I'm gonna get set
No,
up with them.
we were talking about Dune for yes, the David Lynch miniseries, I think it was, or maybe it was released. Oh my God! But yeah, Patrick was in the top 10 of the cast there. No, we were talking about Dune
Hey,
for
we
yes.
have
Right,
our
caller. You need to turn your radio down. Miniseries, I think it was.
we've got an echo on our caller over here.
But yeah,
We're
Patrick
gonna
was
work through this.
there.
Right. Okay, I think we've worked through our tech problems there. All right, caller, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Dan Lackey.
Hi, Dan. Dan, you were our kind of
our
second
half caller.
our
Dan
half caller
finally
on episode
redeemed
2.
being a half a call. Yes.
Yeah. So we're very excited to have you back on the show, Dan. Actually, in a way that we can hear you now. So
Great.
thanks for joining us on Life Support Live.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So reactions, thoughts on what we've been talking about today.
And no pressure because you're representing the entire audience today. No.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Yeah, and very relevant to Star Trek and to the current worldwide scene, really.
Yeah. So what's your take been on what has been happening recently and how this relates to Star Trek and what we love?
Well, that's a
It's a big question.
question.
Yeah, take it in any direction you like.
Something motivated you to call. What have you thought about the discussion today? It's not a tidy talk, and there are all kinds of loose angles and loose ends, and
Yeah. Well, I've been trying to call for a few weeks now.
We've got two white guys and kind of a brown guy here sitting talking about it today. So that's the other thing that.
Well, you said that you've been wanting to call for a while now. Sounds like you've been wanting to talk about something for a while. So, how can we help?
I just find it interesting. I wasn't sure if your format of having sort of guests on and how you do that. I wasn't ready to be quizzed, basically.
Our format is whatever we want it to be, Larry. We have no idea what our format is either. We'd love to talk to you about Star Trek, about what we've been talking about this week. We can take it in whatever direction you like.
So I mentioned in the comments, I thought it was interesting that Star Trek didn't have, as I said to Larry briefly, during this past week, I thought it was interesting that Star Trek didn't have a black captain in command of a starship until Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Earlier tonight, I was thinking about the earliest, what's the earliest examples of prejudice in the original series, and yes, there's that moment when Pike, or the comment that's made about Pike possibly being uncomfortable about having a female on the bridge. There's also, as I mentioned in the comments, I find it quite interesting and quite relevant the episode with Meaty, which has Meaty's peers. They're sort of take a prejudiced viewpoint towards grups, as they call them, which I suppose is particularly could be looked at as relevant in these times as well because of the disease angle that is common in that society. So yeah.
I don't exactly think of, well, I guess it's a society. It's like a Lord of the Flies, although it's not violent. But I mean, it's an arrested society, as they used to love to say in the '60s. You know, it's an outgrowth.
Well, they do take violence against Captain Kirk, don't they? With like bonk bonk on the head and stuff like that.
Oh no, I'm not quite painting them as but what I mean is we haven't seen them. They kind of stand back and they know that when someone basically goes into puberty, they go into the change, they go off and die. But I mean, the rest of them seem to get along based on a age order, but they're aging very slowly. But
I love the
brought them death.
Bonk bonk on the head. A great line that I think Mission Log has really championed. No pun intended there for our Mission Log fans in the audience, but it's really great to have those bonk bonk on the head moments. Sometimes we need that, and sometimes we need the more subtle allegory, as Remember in Voyager's a really great example of that.
Yeah.
You know, and this is one of the things that Linda's just mentioned. Fascinating point. I thought that you were referencing ageism, but the disease angle is more important. This is one of the beautiful things about media, is as we go back to these stories and look at it through our lens of right now in our life experience, there's different things we can take away. I mean, it's isn't it amazing that we're still talking about the original series 50 years later, more than 50 years later, and there's still so much here that we can take from and help us to understand the world we're in right now.
When younger viewers, younger eyes talk about how it's difficult to watch the original series even when they want to, just because of the difference in acting style or the editing and pacing, I always, I say, yes, that's true. And there's a great difference. I think City on the Edge of Forever holds up pretty well for people that are sensitive that way. But I want to say, for context, guys, and context is not just for kings.
Star Trek Discovery.
Star Trek Discovery there. That it's like, go try to watch any other 1 hour drama, much less a sitcom, from 1966 and see, it's like, there's a reason why only 3 or 4 1 hour dramas from that time survive. Even the ones that were doing good works can seem really dated or naive now or whatever. And that's a good thing. If we were still stagnant and everything from the 60s looked fresh and new, then there's something wrong with us. But when you do have something that stands out that is worth watching 50 years later, even for its warts and all, I want to throw this out because it's something I didn't realize until 3 or 4 years ago, because I went along with the whole, oh my God, the miniskirts, that's so sexist, from the 60s, until a woman, a longtime feminist, reminded me that for about 10 minutes in the 60s, miniskirts were an act of rebellion. They weren't miniskirts were no old white guy or old guy in New York or Milan. You are not going to tell me what to wear. I'm not being dictated on fashion by you. I'm going to do this. And they were seen as an act. It was like burning your bra, part of the early feminist movement, the early women's lib.
Which I think, Larry, never really happened. I think, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments section, but I don't think any bras were actually burnt in protest.
Maybe. Well, there was people were burning their draft cards. So I think there were some nothing else staged, photo op moments. But what my point here is that we look back at miniskirts now because they very quickly became a sexist, male ogling thing and, objectification and all that. But for a moment, and I'm not knocking them in, a lot of women love it. A lot of women love to show, whatever. What I'm saying is, in the moment, it's lost on how miniskirts were seen as an act of rebellion by women against the patriarchy fashion world and telling them what they could and couldn't wear. And the whole thing about, where are the hemlines this year? Oh, they're low. Oh, they're medium. Oh, they're, So just Throw that out there.
And of course, there's the moment, at least one moment in the Next Generation when males are seen wearing skirts, and of course, even Scotty wore a kilt, surely, in the original series as a type of skirt. Well,
yeah, it's I was bummed
that was an ancient culture skirt, so that was okay.
I was bummed we didn't see more of the Next Generation scant, just to have some continued diversity there. So that was a bummer, but we see this with Counselor Troy's uniform as well. I thought it was a big moment with her character when she finally did pass the bridge exam and was also given a same uniform as everyone else. I thought she was more empowered that way when we finally saw that. So that was great when her character finally got that same agency that a lot of the other characters had.
Of course, Marina would say, less boobs, more brain. It's like, she talks about that switch, and they weren't simultaneous. She took the bridge exam after she'd been in uniform for a while, but it all flowed out of the later Next Generation, evolution, we'll just say.
So, Dan, I want to thank you for being our next caller here. As Jared said, if I can find his comment, a bonk bonk on the head is also how Ali's wife tells him that it's time to end the show, which is also true. So, Dan, thank you for being with us again this week, and actually being able to hear you this time.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. And I'd like to give a quick shout out to Portal 47 that Larry's wearing the badge, and I'm currently wearing the T-shirt.
Oh, I love it.
Yes.
I love
I don't know
it.
if you can see that. Well,
yeah,
anyway.
thank you for sharing that.
We were virtually mini-conning all year long, way before it was cool.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan. We'll see you in the next one.
Thank you, Dan.
See you.
Larry, we are coming to the end of the show here. So we're going to have a vote. I'm not sure we have any idea what we're going to be doing next week, but some of the things that have been discussed on our Facebook group poll, if you want to join our Facebook group poll, go to facebook.com/groups/lifesupportlive. We're thinking about misinformation and fake news, the Voyager conspiracy, Enterprise's stigma as it relates to discrimination with the coronavirus. Music and mental health has come up. Maybe we should do that, Larry. Let's give ourselves a little bit of a lighter episode maybe next week. And we've also been talking about...
We've had a lot of topics floating around on the poll, but the important thing is find the Facebook group page for Life Support Live and take a vote. Join us if you haven't done it. It's technically a private group, so you have to be asked to join, but as long as you're not a bot or a troll and you're a real person who has some real thoughts and real feelings, then you're in like Flynn, as they used to say. Not Michael Flynn, the old 50s phrase, in like Flynn. But yes, come join the page and come vote with us. So we've got people from all the platforms. I'm looking at the chat here, all over the place. Just remember that, see, Linda says, yes, bras were burned. And I think there are photos. I think there's news footage too. Yeah, videos. We've got that.
Tim and Sean are saying music might be nice. I would love to talk about that. And Glenn says I can guarantee if we do music and mental health, I'll jump on the call. So if you got value out of this episode, please help us to share it. There's a new effort to unite the Star Trek community. Larry, can you share a little bit about that? I know Portal 47 is a part of it.
Yes. So it started off with 9 podcasters and web pages, news sites. There's been more added. I know Trek FM is going to be getting involved. They haven't announced it yet, but Mark Altman's Inglorious Treksperts, some of the other media-related podcasts, the Inverse podcast are getting involved, who've been covering modern Star Trek. Anyway, Trekkies, hashtag Trekkies Together. All it is just trying to show the Star Trek community's growing support of Black Lives Matter movement, of the need for police reform, of this, again, Band-Aid being stripped away, our Shaka, our eyes opened, or Temba, whichever Tamarian it was. But the growing awareness, and something that we've touched on, and I want to hit it again here at the end, the systemic part of it, because that's what blends into the background. That's why people, and I know Bill early in the show, he was on the chat saying, I'm not racist, I don't know any racists, not trying to call, when we've said everybody's a racist, it's in kind of a, it's, you know, it's when we say we are all fill in the blank, when we all feel the same way. It's not that we're all guilty and should be, you know, thrown in jail or put in a corner here. It's that we're all guilty of being human, and in a mass way not being aware. And a lot of times it's not our fault. Like I said, those babies are being wired in an early age to what's around them, but it's our responsibility as adults to not stick our heads in the sand, not live in a cave, especially when we're in a global world with this global technology. And we do have access to the information. Like you said, a lot of these documentaries, a lot of things were not easily available. We've got streaming YouTube. We've got the docs on Netflix, on Prime, all the channels, and we've got more and more voices getting access to be producers, not just of documentaries, but of 1-hour dramas and sitcoms, and having a more global worldview, all those voices. So all these things, they can strike people as being token one-off movements. But we're becoming more globalized and more globally aware. So yes, Trekkies Together is about that. What it comes down to is we're asking everybody to make. Everybody has their own charities. Mine were the ACLU and the Southern Poverty Law Center for tracing hate groups. A lot are concerned just with Black Lives Matter or just with some of the police reform charities. But all of those entities, the podcasts and the websites in the Trek world, are asking people to make a $47 donation to whatever group it is they're pushing or somebody on the list. And you can see I've got a blog post at LarryNemecek.com that's up about it. But Trek Movie, I'm going to get in trouble now. Trek Core, Trek News, the news sites are putting full stories up. And most everybody, most of the Roddenberry Network shows, like I said, I know Trek FM's about to. Dan and Geek at Trek Geeks. I don't want to leave anybody out, but a lot of the networks and podcast sites and websites are doing that, just to show that Star Trek is living its DNA, and putting that forward. So that's been a big because a part of this is we are not all black, and that whole comfort zone of how do I help but stay out of the way, but I'm there when I'm needed, and that was letting our black, our African American, or whatever country they're from, wherever they are in the world, have that platform, have that, as you said, reaching out to some voices in all your communities that may not have been heard, and just giving them more airspace. So anyway, that's what's been going on in Trekland this week, responding to how this keeps evolving, and the fact that for once this may finally take hold and become a movement, even a global movement for change.
And if you are interested in learning more about this on my end of the media stuff, I'm going to have a video early next week about that does a deeper dive into psychology and racism. And yesterday there was a live stream on the Psych Show about how media can help us develop empathy. If you're interested in this topic, we go deep in depth into it in that live stream. And Larry, where can people find more of your work this week?
I left out Memory Alpha. That's another one that I should have mentioned there. Yes. So LarryNemecek.com. We will be with Trekland Tuesdays live at 1 p.m. Pacific on Tuesday live across my expanded channels now. So Larry Nemecek's Trekland is my Instagram and Facebook. My YouTube channel is Larry Nemecek. Please, everybody. Some of you may be watching there, but I'm trying to bulk up my YouTube channel. It's just Larry Nemecek. I love a subscribe and a share. This show and Trekland Tuesdays Live are both being archived over there too. And I'm still running a Corona time. Ali, we're still the coronavirus, and the cases are still going up.
I know.
And people are worried that the protests and the police pushback, all of that we may see a spike in the corona coming out of this. So I hope not. We'll see. Well, but I'm still offering my corona sample. Just to say, LarryNemecek.com or at Portal47.net. I'm still offering a little sampler of Portal 47. Thank you, Dan, again. It's the simple 3 for 2 deal there. So just go check that out if you would. That's how I'm keeping my head above water while we're waiting for all of our live events to come back the way we can. So anyway, I appreciate that. Larry Nemecek on Twitter, guys.
And I am Ollie Mattu on Twitter, and you can find me on The Psych Show on YouTube. And with that, live long and prosper, folks.
Whoa, trek well, everybody.
Take care, folks.